First of all, I would like to say good afternoon to everybody and really like to thank you for the invitation. Must be my third time in Slovenia in recent times, so I'm really happy to be back again. I also would like to congratulate the Slovenian Women's Lobby because for organising an event like such as this, because I think the key issue is to keep Beijing alive. And it's through events like this that we're actually going to be able to make sure that everything that we fought for back in 1995, 20 years ago, will not be lost. And it really is important that we don't forget that, and we make sure that we pass the torch on to other younger generations as well. So I'm going to talk to you about the European Women's Lobby and what we have done. We have just produced our Beijing report, 20 years on, monitoring what has happened at the level of the European Union, and with the input of our members, including the members from the Slovenian Women's Lobby. The publication looks like this. I have brought some copies with me, and you're very welcome to help yourselves. And if you need any further copies, please don't hesitate to contact us. What we've tried to do is make something that we can use, something that's really friendly, something that you can actually pick up. It's tools, it's got information, it's got recommendations, it's got a sense of where we're at today in relation to the 12 critical areas of concern and what we should be doing about it. So we hope you will find it useful. And what we will be doing as well from next year, from January, is every single month, 12 months of the year, 12 critical areas of concern. We will be concentrating on each critical area of concern. We will be starting in January with women and the economy, and we will be doing like an update of our publication, which we did in 2012, on the impact of austerity measures on women's rights and gender equality in Europe. Because if there is one thing that has really damaged women's rights in the past couple of years, it's been not only the crisis, but it's been the response to the crisis. It's been a deliberate, austerity-driven policy which has had a huge impact on women's rights and on gender equality right across the board. I think every single country hasn't been spared. And I suppose it really begs the question, is gender equality perceived as a luxury? Is it only when there is prosperity that we can talk about gender equality? But no. So that's the first thing that we really need to challenge, is to say that there's no way out of this crisis. Actually, we can never go back to business again. And we need to have women shaping the political agenda and shaping the type of Europe we want. And that must be our first recommendation to all of our policymakers at every single level, whether it's local, regional, national, or European. While we can say that over the years, certainly Beijing has had a huge impact. I mean, it's been a pioneer. We've talked over the years about gender equality. Women, young girls feel confident to stand up and, request their rights and demand their rights. So I think that's been a really positive impact of Beijing. We're obviously now at a stage where, while the situation and while the evolution has been quite positive across the board, we're at a very critical stage now that we really need to look at and we really need to focus on. Obviously, the big challenges remain. And one of the challenges, as I said, is really if we don't change the policies and if there's an absence of decisive action, it's actually going to take over 100 years to achieve gender equality, which means that none of us in this room will ever see gender equality. And that has been based on statistical data that the European Commission has collected in its annual report on progress between women and men, which is a report, I should say, that's lost amongst many different other reports, and which in fact is not feeding other policies, and particularly the macroeconomic framework, coming out of the same commission as well. So these are the kind of contradictions that we must be very aware of and that we must seize. So when you're looking at issues like the Europe 2020 strategy, when your country is requested to submit national budgets to the European Commission to check to see if your deficits are being kept low, these are the kind of issues that we must make sure that there's a gender equality perspective. These policies have to be gender mainstreamed, because at the end of the day, the economy has to work for the well-being of us all, and not the other way around. So at the European Women's Lobby, because of the midterm review of this Europe 2020 strategy, which has a number of key objectives, it has no gender equality perspective. One of the key objectives, employment, as Meryl said, has an employment rate of 75% by 2020 for women and for men. But it totally refuses to see that women and men are not at the same starting point in the labour market, and you can't apply the same kind of policies, that you really have to look right across the board. Women are not a homogeneous group. There are specific issues relating to women with diversity of women, and all of those issues have to be taken into account. If we're serious about a 75% employment rate for women that will actually give them economic independence, because it's not just a job for the sake of a job, well, then we have to really look at these issues and take them very seriously. And I would invite you as well, as a women's organisation, to look at those budgets, to look at those national reform programmes, to look at those country-specific recommendations that the European institutions, particularly the Commission, sends back to your country, and in many cases requires you to make all sorts of reforms, and those kind of reforms are having devastating effects right across the board, because they're cutting into healthcare, they're cutting into childcare, and they're cutting into many of the benefits that all of us once thought were there forever, in terms of having a social protection model and a safety net that would catch us all if we fell. And also in terms then of gender mainstreaming, we still need to see, because that's where gender mainstreaming came from, Beijing. Beijing was instrumental in putting that on the agenda, but we still need to see that transformative nature. What we see is, we often see the word being put in here, there and everywhere, but actually no strategy and no tools or mechanisms that actually allow us to see, well, is it working? And how are you gender mainstreaming? So these are the kind of challenges that remain. What I propose to do now is to look at these particular issues in relation to not necessarily the facts and figures, because I think we heard that from Marilyn, but really about what the issues are and what we're doing. And these recommendations you can also find in our report. So in terms of violence against women, one of our main claims for, I would say, for the last 20 years, since we came back from Beijing, was to have a European strategy. Initially, we were calling for a European directive, so a law, legislation on violence against women. There's a lot of resistance. We were told back then, and we're still being told, that there is no legal basis for it. But on the premise that violence against women is a barrier to women's equality and a barrier to gender equality between women and men, that in itself should be a sufficient reason to say that that barrier needs to be tackled in order for us to be able to achieve gender equality. So we're still maintaining our claim all these years later. We want a European strategy, right across a multi-level strategy. And we want 2016 to be the European Year on Violence Against Women. I invite you all to join us in this campaign. We have postcards and a petition on our website. And we are now, because there's a change of a European Commission, we now have to kind of start the ball rolling again. And we will be putting a lot of pressure on the new president of the Commission in order for him to agree, because that's how it happens, that 2016 will be European Year on Violence Against Women. I should warn you, there's a lot of resistance out there, a lot of resistance. There have been some legislative measures along the way, such as the victims package, and we've always been told that the victims package is a way of dealing with these issues. But no, we want a multi-level strategy, which will include as well campaigns and the collection of data and feeding into what's already there. It's not starting all over again, but actually building on it. We also want every single member state of the EU to ratify the Istanbul Convention, and we want the European Union to ratify the Istanbul Convention. Again, there's a lot of resistance there. I think your minister, unfortunately, I missed her this morning, but I think she said that Slovenia would ratify. There's only 8 member states in the European Union, 8 out of 28, that have ratified the Istanbul Convention to date. So there's still a lot of work to be done around that. In terms of poverty, poverty is on the rise, and poverty among women is absolutely on the rise. And while it's very difficult, as Marilyn said earlier on, it's very difficult to have data that actually shows what exactly the situation is, because one of the problems is that the data is collected through household units, which assumes that there's equality within households, that there's an equal division, an equal share of income within households. And that's not the case. We can't assume it's the case. We don't know, actually, because we don't have any data to say it. But we can put as a hypothesis it's not the case. So therefore, we need to move beyond the household unit measure, and we need to find measures that will actually look at the individualized income. So it's not by chance that today we can say that single-headed households and older women are poorer and with high levels of poverty in comparison to men and in comparison to the averages for the whole of the population, because we're looking at their individualized income. So we can actually looking at it from a gender perspective, we're looking at it from women's income that's derived from different sources, whether it's from work or whether it's from social benefits as well. So these are the kind of issues that we need to tackle, because we need to have, at national level, we need to have real data and also targets. We need to have strategies that will address women's poverty, because it is on the increase. Coming back to the Europe 2020 strategy, there is another headline target to lift 25 million out of poverty by 2020. That was set in 2010. We're now 2014, and actually poverty has risen by 6 million since 2010. So we really need to have a strategy, a gender-focused strategy, and we need to look at it in a holistic way throughout the life cycle. We saw from the data as well that there are moments in women's lives where there are peaks and where there are, more difficulties, where things emerge, but particularly we saw it in the older age. And I really would like to emphasize the gender pension gap, which is 39% in Europe. It's an absolute disgrace. There are countries in the European Union where women have no right to pensions at all. Now, we're talking about an older generation, and that is something that we absolutely should never, ever happen again. 39%. And when you look at it from an individualized perspective, like they did in Germany, carried out a study in 2011, and looked at the individualized income derived from pensions, whether it's the state pension, the first pillar, the second pillar being complementary pensions, third pillar private pensions. The gap was practically 60%. So it was 59.3%. I mean, it's just huge. So it shows you that there's an accumulation of inequalities throughout women's lives. And at the end of their lives, what they find themselves in is dire, dire poverty. In terms of sexual and reproductive, I should have put in health and rights. Obviously, the whole issue of abortion is back on the table again. And I think the signal is that we can never sit back and say that we have everything forever. Nothing is forever. Our rights that our mothers, grandmothers fought for, they're actually being challenged today. They're actually being put on the table in countries where we never imagined that this would be an issue anymore. They're beginning to talk about it. And I would like to just talk about the Spanish situation. And we worked very hard with our Spanish members. All of our members worked to support our Spanish members and really lobbied a lot with them. And I'm really happy that the Spanish government has withdrawn the proposal, which I really think is the result of the mobilization across borders, across countries. We're here in this together, and we're going to stand together. And I think that really was a very successful, but it's not over, because I do think that there'll be other countries that will soon come with similar kind of proposals. And I think we need to be very vigilant, and that's really the message that we need to draw from that. In terms of, so that's it. In terms of women's economic independence, I talked a little bit about it. We saw the statistics again about women's employment rate. But you really have to look at it from the full-time equivalent, because we're not really comparing, we're comparing apples and oranges to a certain extent. Insofar as if we're looking at employment rates, we have to really take into consideration where women work, what do they do, and their patterns of work. And what we see is a very segregated labour market with a concentration of women in about 6 areas, and the same for men. But what we really see is the value that's given to those sectors. We can see that the caring sector is highly and majority dominated by women, And it's the sector where there are poor working conditions, poor wages. Yet, I'm not comparing sectors because it's difficult to compare, but what I'm saying is a male-dominated sector like building, like construction, is very well paid and is very good working conditions. Also, the trade union is very, very important in those sectors as well. So I think that these are the kind of patterns that we need to start looking at, because we're talking about, we shouldn't forget that the back in the treaties, we're talking about equal pay for equal work, but also for work of equal value. And I think that's what we need to really nip in the bud. We're talking about value. And to a certain extent, I think we need to also question ourselves when we're saying that women tend to go into nursing, teaching, But the question should be, why are those sectors undervalued? Why do we say that they are not important? Yes, they are. Without care, none of us would be in this room either today. Care is the backbone of society. And anybody, including the Commission presidents, including all men in top jobs, they too were cared for. And if they hadn't been cared for, they wouldn't be where they were today. So I think we need to question, as feminists as well, we need to question. Let's not fall into that trap of saying what women do is not important, it's the soft issues of life, and what men do is really important. No, I think we really need to question that, because if we're talking about gender equality, we're talking about sharing a space. It's no longer the domain, the privileged domain of men. It's now a shared space. And that shared space, we need to be able to shape it together. To a certain extent, we need a kind of a new gender contract, but we need to be able to shape that space and to be able to say, well, for us, care is really important, because we can see right across the board that's one of the areas that has been really attacked in terms of reform and austerity measures, public funding for care, whether it's care, childcare, whether it's care of the elderly, care of the sick. It's really becoming privatized. And to the extent that in some countries, women are saying, well, is it worth my while going out to work when I'm working really to pay for my care? And the thing is as well, we need to question, why should care be a woman's issue only? It's not. This has to be a shared area as well. We have to make sure that women can be equal carers and equal earners on the same level with men. And in that case, what we're working on in the Women's Lobby, we're working on, for example, the revision of the maternity leave directive to strengthen a minimum set of standards right across the European Union. What we want is 20 weeks, fully paid. There's no reason why women should be paid less because they are on maternity leave. They're not obliged to take the 20 weeks, but there is a physicality of giving birth as well. And I think we shouldn't throw the baby away with the bathwater, because it's not an either-or situation. Maternity is very particular to women, and parental leave and other forms of leave is about caring, and that only starts when there is after childbirth. So I think we must be careful not to throw our baby away with the bathwater, because I think the revision of the maternity leave directive has certainly sparked absolute resistance and all forms of different discussions. But let's not mix it up. It's great that it's put these issues on the table. It has really highlighted these issues and brought these issues up on the table so we can discuss them. But let's be careful. Let's not throw everything away at once. Men too have their absolute right to care, but they don't give birth at the end of the day. And we have to recognize there is a physicality, and women have the right to be able to rest and to be able to recuperate and to breastfeed if they want to. Nobody should be telling them what to do. And we believe that a stronger maternity leave directive, the one that was negotiated by the previous European Parliament, is a very, very good framework. But it was threatened to be withdrawn as part of a red tape exercise, clearing up the system. And it was part of this, what they call the refit communication, which passed like that, and which proposes to actually withdraw the proposal for maternity leave, because it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere because there's so much resistance behind it, because governments are saying it's not right now, we can't be paying. Employers are saying the same thing. But let's have a rational discussion about it. Not everything will be lost. So we're going to hold on to that very much. We've carried out many campaigns, and we will continue to do so. And it's been 8 years, actually, and 4 years since the European Parliament, 6 years, and then 4 years since the European Parliament adopted its position. But as feminists, we don't give up easily. Somebody said that about Sonia earlier on, I think. We don't give up easily, and we will hang on in there. And I think that together we'll be able to hopefully move ahead. Also in terms then just of social security and taxation, I think there are issues, there are areas perhaps that traditionally women's movements, feminist movements haven't really got involved in, but I think we need to really, this is really crucial. This is about redistribution of wealth. This is about economic independence, about being able to make real choices in your lives. And this will also give us more of a sense of the inequalities that women are actually experiencing in many different areas of their lives. And then finally, women in decision making. Again, I'm not going to go through all the statistics, but just to say that on the table as well, there is a proposal called Women on Boards. And this is about the private sector. So this is really touching on a very sore point, shall I say. The proposal has also been on the table, not as long as the maternity leave, but practically a couple of years. Again, resistance, a lot of resistance. It's about ensuring that there's parity on the boards of those companies that are quoted on the stock exchange. We're talking about how many? About maybe even 1,000 in Europe. Because those companies that are quoted on the stock exchange, there's about, in some countries, I think in Germany it's about 100, but in other countries there's only 20. So you're not talking about a massive, huge change, but you're obviously talking about an area that's very sensitive and an area where power sharing is really going to be very difficult. So this is on the board, this is on the table. We will be picking it up again and going with it and making sure that too will go through the legislative process. And again, law and directives, it's only the beginning, because we really need to make sure that they're being implemented and that they're being monitored, and to really pick up what's happening, what's working, what's not working, feedback and change. Law isn't set in stone. It's there, it's a living tool. We have to also make sure that women know about their rights, know how to use these tools, and to feed back to the legislator when things are not working. So I just wanted to say then finally that it'll also be the 25th anniversary of the European Women's Lobby next year. So we will be also celebrating achievements, celebrating challenges. But what we really see, and I really would like to finish on an optimistic note, is that what we really see, and this is probably one of the positive outcomes of the crisis, is that we see now a new feminism, or a new form of feminism. We see young women angry, they're fed up, they're not going to stand by, they're not going to take it anymore. And they're using all of the social media to actually be able to convey that. What we also see on a global level is a real fed up as well with the paradigm, with the kind of model that we're all stuck into, that everybody's trying to bring us back to business as usual. No, it can't be business as usual. So we have on a global level as well, looking at the holistic vision of our world, and we're talking about really incorporating the environment again into that, because that is, we all live in this planet together, so we need to be working on these issues together as well. So it's really important that we build alliances, build coalitions. And I'd like to just come back to one of the issues you were talking about earlier on, and that's GDP. GDP is an outdated model. It doesn't tell us anything. It tells us that we're killing ourselves, basically, because when you actually look at the indicators that are being used, you're talking about destruction, really, at the end of the day. So we need to go beyond GDP. We need to be able to look at well-being. There are indicators out there. We can start looking at that. But we can't obviously do that alone. We need to do that with others. And we need to be looking at holistically across the planet, and to look at the women's movement, feminist movements across the planet. And 2015 is a good year for that, because there's going to be the renewal of the Millennium Goals. There's going to be a standalone objective on women's rights. And we also have a new commission. We have now a commissioner who has the title of gender equality, which is a very good sign and a very good hope. So I think that together we will be able to shift those stones and actually look to build a new European Union, but also a global world that we all can be part of, and that we can all identify with, and that we can be part of going towards a global citizens movement. So I'd like to thank you very much. Just if I may say, sorry, I forgot about this. This is an Indian writer who really is giving a sense of that things are moving, and she says another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Thanks.